So, hey,
That's
Scott,
okay.
thank you again for coming on Talks with Toss. I'm really excited for this particular interview just because you're not only a two-time Olympian, but you're involved in so many ways when it comes to sports in Australia and just all the other things that you've come and become involved in and how you've grown since the last time we first spoke in Greece back in what, 2015, something like that.
Yeah, it was a while ago. It was, I was just thinking back to that experience in Greece, and thanks for having me on the podcast. And excited to share a bit of my story, and looking forward to a chat.
Yeah, so we'll just start with the simple things, basic introduction. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So, grew up in Australia. It's not known for its winter sports by any stretch, but I grew up in an area of Australia, sort of the southeast coast, where we do have snow, and I grew up in the mountain region, and I grew up with a group of friends that were particularly talented skiers, and it was just a school sport that we progressed, and I really enjoyed doing that, and just made my way through the ranks and continued to progress it, and had a lot of success early, and that led to my first Olympics in 2010 in Vancouver, and that was such an incredible experience. I was the lowest ranked skier at the start gate, and I was maybe I was second last to qualify, and the lowest ranked skier at the start gate, and so I was a huge blessing in disguise, or a huge blessing to have qualified. And I'd broken my collarbone just 6 weeks prior, so just to get there was incredible. And that experience was just something else. Like, the Olympics was a lifelong dream for me. So to make it to my first games was something else. And then continued my sporting career, competed in Sochi, Russia in 2014, and then wrapped up my skiing career after then. And then I sort of progressed into a bit of sports administration and a bit of philanthropic work, and then really transitioned my career into property. So a little bit away from sport, but I'm still very much involved. So
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're currently the president of the Athletes Commission. Is that correct?
Chair. I think president's probably a bit of a
excuse me,
stretch.
because the Athletes Commission here on Guam, they go by president and vice president. So
right.
same but different, But is that
same.
Chair?
Yes. So I was only so I've sat on that athlete commission now for almost 4 years, and just recently our chair and deputy chair came off the commission, and there was an election, and got the call up. So it's quite a humbling, quite humbled to have been elected, actually, and excited to sort of lead that athlete commission over the next little while, and try and make some changes and do some good where I can.
Yeah, awesome. I had to ask because I think around 2015 was when I was the Athletes Commission here on Guam, and I just remember that being such an amazing experience to be that liaison between the athletes and the Olympic Committee, and then finding ways to have better communication amongst the federations with athletes. And I thought it was really eye-opening because I got to learn a lot about other sports and other athletes, and I really appreciated that community building aspect when it came to the different sports. So good on you for that. That's awesome. But tell us a little bit more about men's ski cross specifically. Can you describe the sport?
Yeah. So ski cross, I describe it as like motocross on skis. So 4 skiers race head to head through a series of berms, turns, jumps, and then the first 2 to the finish line progress through the next round. So you start with 8 rounds of 4, and all the way to a final 4. So it's a super exciting sport to watch. You can see who's winning as opposed to just an athlete against a time. plenty of crashes, and yeah, it's just it's a super exciting sport. I loved it ever since I made that transition from alpine skiing to ski cross, and yeah, I just never really looked back. It was such a strategic sort of transition between alpine to ski cross, and yeah, the timing was impeccable, and yeah, it was never really looked back. I've had a great time, and very fortunate to have sort of traveled the world for maybe 6-7 years when I was on that World Cup tour, traveling with a great team and seeing some pretty incredible places. So yeah, it was super lucky.
So that's completely different from what most, I would say, are used to here on Guam, because it definitely doesn't snow. But I would say now that you have so much access online to being exposed to different sports, and especially the winter sports, and finding that more and more people are trying to travel to places like Japan where it does snow, and to try different sports like snowboarding and skiing, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to share a little bit more about that sport, as not even just Guam, but other Pacific Islanders who may have never even seen snow. I'd never tried skiing. I really want to try it. I did try snowboarding.
You have to.
For the first, yeah, I know I have to. My mom skied. She actually grew up in California, so she skied. But I tried snowboarding for the first time, I think about 2-3 years ago. I can't remember specifically, but I mean, man, completely different ball game when it comes to dealing with snow, but it is amazing. It is so much fun to just be out in a completely different environment like that. So I'm sure the same thing goes for skiing as well. But yeah,
it's that idea of, look, what I really loved about skiing in particular is it's an outdoor sport where you do have to deal with the elements, and it's got such a raw feel to it. Like it's not like it's not motor car racing. You don't have an engine. You're very much at the mercy of gravity, and it's about how efficiently you can get from down the hill. And it's, yeah, I just love that element of it.
Yeah, and I even had to, before getting on here with you, I even looked up on where does it actually snow in Australia? Where does it snow? And it's like, you learn something new every day. But I mean, most would think, oh, maybe Japan, maybe Korea to potentially go skiing or snowboarding. But now I have Australia on that list to potentially go and try. Maybe not the same as you, but I'll stick to the.
Australia and even New Zealand's got a phenomenal ski season as well. So yeah, there is snow down here. We probably 3 months of the year in sort of that southeast pocket. Yeah, there's some great skiing.
Yeah, and it would be, I think, our summertime too. So it's like perfect to like get away from the middle of the summer heat potentially. But and so
Totally.
speaking of men's ski cross and talking about being at the mercy of the slopes and gravity and how efficiently you can get through that course, what are the training demands like to prepare for that?
Look, it's probably it's a mixed bag depending on the type of year or the time of year. So we broke our kind of year up into sort of 4 segments. So we obviously have a great domestic season in Australia, and when you're training on snow, you sort of start your session on snow at sort of 7 a.m., ski from 7 through to probably lunchtime with a break in between. And then you'd come off the hill, and then you do your recovery, you do your video analysis, you do your prep on your equipment, and then potentially sort of a gym session in the afternoon. So it's a full day of exercise. Of exercise and training. And I guess that's the key difference is when you're on snow, it's very, very time consuming. In the lead up to so after the domestic season, we'll do a strength and conditioning block, which is obviously less time demanding. We'd sort of spend a couple of hours in the gym, might do a cardio session in the afternoon, but it's sort of like 3 hours a day. and then you go, there's sort of that strength and conditioning phase before you head away for the Northern Hemisphere season. And then that Northern Hemisphere season, you really back off the weights. It's about skiing, it's about technique, and it's about active recovery. So you sort of, it's really about that maintenance phase and just keeping your body intact and and injury-free throughout the whole season. And so you're able to back up every weekend for competitions. And then at the end of the Northern Hemisphere season, we have a really solid break for a month, 6 weeks before we get back into our strength and conditioning phase before the domestic season. So it's a very well thought out 12-month kind of program, and you've got distinct blocks where you need to hit targets. So it's very targeted training in many respects. And that's what I really liked about it. It's not like you're an Olympic weightlifter where you're in the gym every day and it's the same kind of exercise and same repetition. We have had very distinct blocks of training to achieve a very specific goal in order to set ourselves up for the next block, which is a very different block. So I think that's what I really liked about it. It was the strength and conditioning component was very specific to a performance related task. So yeah, it was good.
So it's funny you say that, because I literally just started powerlifting about 10 months ago, give or take.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, my past before was actually, my original sport was rugby sevens. And so I can definitely relate when it comes to, okay, this is more of a strength and conditioning block. And then we start to taper down those weights and we start to focus more on rugby specific training. And I definitely miss the variety, or like literally that, like you said, that targeted type of programming when it comes to a means to an end, a specific competition or specific competitions or events, whatever the case may be, versus powerlifting. It's very repetitive and it can get a little monotonous, but you know, I mean, I love it nonetheless. I really do. But yeah, I can see how that keeps things interesting and that keeps you motivated throughout an entire year of training. And of course, more than that, because you're training to go to an Olympic event that only occurs every X amount of years. So
yeah, that's totally it.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of it is a lot easier to motivate yourself when you do have a shorter block, and you've got to hit your target within that, whatever it is, a 3-month training block. And so because time is so key and crucial, it does motivate you every day, and you do push harder every day. And that's what I really liked about it. And then knowing that the next block, you're not going to get that opportunity to do your power, like your lifting and your strength and conditioning. So yeah, I think that's probably what kept me in the sport for as long as I was. And yeah, it wasn't just about training. It was more training for a specific purpose.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so you mentioned things about targeted programming or specifics and meeting certain markers, if you will, throughout that 12-month plan. I want to shift towards when you were actually preparing for the 2014 Winter Olympics. Obviously, you had targets set out, but there's a few disruptions prior to, and a few series of events that could have deterred you from competing in that event. Can you talk about those experiences and how you managed to still more or less achieve the ultimate target of competing in the 2014 Winter Olympics?
Yeah, I might go back to, I think I mentioned before about my lead up to the Vancouver Olympics. So
yeah, collarbone, which I hadn't known, by the way. Oh,
sorry?
With your collarbone, I didn't know you broke your collarbone before that either.
Yeah, so I was certainly an underdog trying to qualify for the Vancouver Olympics, and I pretty much racked up enough points. The way that it works for freestyle skiing is you need to be ranked in the top 35 athletes in the world on the World Cup ranking list by a certain date in order to qualify for the Olympics. And then what happens though is each nation is only allowed to take 4 athletes. So if you've got, say, 6 Canadians in the top 35, there's what we call an adjusted list. So it's actually, if you're ranked in the top 37, you will then have that opportunity to go, because those 5th and 6th Canadians aren't able to attend. So there's an adjusted quota spot. So in the lead up to Vancouver, I'd kind of racked up enough points. I was sitting in the top 35 on the adjusted list. And then I had a huge crash and broke my collarbone, had a nasty head contusion and bleeding on my brain. And I was just in a really bad place. And I thought I'd lost my Olympic dream. I thought I was out. And I remember over the next sort of 4 weeks in the lead up to the games, there was still a few more events, quite qualifying events, and I just saw my name getting bumped down the list and closer to that cutoff. So it was a super stressful time, just seeing that I might not qualify, but then also trying to get myself prepared to compete at the games. I was still getting super dizzy spells, and obviously a broken collarbone I was trying to recover from. So it was a really challenging time. And then maybe it was a week prior to the games, I got the call up to say that I'd been given a position on this adjusted quota list. My collarbone was still terrible, but I was able to ski, and I could work through the pain. But I was, as I mentioned, I was the second last to qualify through the adjusted quota list, and I was the lowest ranked skier at that start gate.
Wow.
And I finished 7th on the day, so I made it all the way to the semi-finals, and I narrowly missed the final round. And it was just it really was. It was kind of like, it was a dream come true to make the Olympics, but then to compete and deliver on the world stage. That's something, a moment I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
Extremely inspiring, and I'm sure Australia was extremely proud of having an athlete like you representing your country, on the world
we
stage.
There's not a whole lot of us, obviously, the Australians that compete at a Winter Olympics. I think we had a team of about 40, and we every Olympics we sort of win maybe 1, 2, 3 medals. So it's to deliver a top 10 performance was pretty incredible. And then that kind of changed. So the lead up to Vancouver, I was underdog, not really recognized as an Olympic hopeful or a medal hopeful. But on the back of Vancouver, leading into the next Olympics in 2014, I'd won my first World Cup. I think I was ranked in the top 10, and I'd significantly progressed my I guess ranking in the sport and my skills, and everything was going relatively well in the lead up to Sochi. I was ranked maybe it was just outside the top 10, but I'd well and truly accrued enough points in the season prior to qualify for the games. There was maybe a handful of events prior to the Olympics that we still had to compete in, but I'd accrued enough points that there was no chance of me getting bumped out of that top 35. So everything was going well. And then I was back in Australia. I was in my strength and conditioning phase for our domestic season. And I received a phone call that I never thought I'd receive, but my father was involved in a tragic workplace accident, and which he lost his life. So that, it's amazing just how like a life event like that just changes your perspective on everything. It seems like you dedicated your whole life to this Olympic pursuit and this Olympic campaign, but it's amazing how trivial something like that becomes when you deal with a life event like that. And so really that threw everything up in the air for me. And I moved back I was in Sydney at the time, working with my strength and conditioning coach there, but I moved back to Jindabyne, where I grew up, to be with my mum and my brother, and just sort of worked through that time. I kind of put sport, the Olympics, on hold just to be with family and kind of support them. So it was a really, really challenging time. And my father ran a construction company, so I moved home to run that. We had maybe 10, 15 employees that sort of relied on that paycheck, I guess, week to week. So I kind of took on that responsibility to try and make sure they were all okay and financially set up. And yeah, it was a really challenging period of life. And it wasn't until probably 6 months after that event that I started to turn my attention back to the Olympics. And I was sort of like, look, I've kind of pre-qualified. My dad would have absolutely wanted me to go. It seems crazy not to pursue that. So I sort of shifted gears and I started to get back into preparing for those games. And it probably, in hindsight, I think I think I was probably quite underprepared in many respects. I just wasn't really in the right frame of mind. I hadn't really done the work in terms of my off season and my pre-season training. I hadn't spent the time on snow. But I departed and went overseas. I think it was October or November, and it was one of the first events of the year at a venue called San Candido, Italy. Now, this event it's where I'd won my first World Cup there, and so it's a venue that I enjoyed racing at and I was confident at. But in the qualification round, I think of the first day, I had a really, really bad crash, and I wound up being airlifted to the hospital, where I woke up with four. They're called, your spine's made up of obviously you've got your spinal cord and your vertebrae that surrounds that, and then you've got these transverse processes, which is like the wings. And I'd broken four of my transverse processes on my left side. I had a pneumothorax, which is like an air pocket on my lung. And I just remember lying in that hospital bed, just like, not only had I'd lost my dad early in the year, I'd made every effort to get back to those Olympics, and then to have just had that Olympic dream ripped from me again. That was without a doubt my low point. Just trying to rationalize all of it and try and understand what was to be. And it's probably the first time that I think losing my father really like sunk in, and I just had time to process that. So it was a really, really dark and challenging time. And it's funny how your mind works. And I think in that time it wasn't in the first few days. It's probably a week later that I probably appreciated that this was as bad as it gets. And it was only up from here. So I quickly turned my attention to how do I, is it possible to get back to the Olympics? Is it possible to rehab? At the time, I wasn't able to fly back to Australia because I had this air pocket on my lung, so I had to stay in Italy for a bit longer. But I just started trying to turn my attention to what could be and if it was a possibility. And then I eventually got back to Australia, and the doctors, I don't know whether they were trying to fill me with confidence or optimism, but they downplayed the extent of the injuries, and they really encouraged me to sort of push hard and start training again. And yeah, it was sort of like, the rationale was, your transverse processes are surrounded by so much muscle
Mm-hmm.
that you're not going to make it any worse. So you're not going to, like, within reason, you can't break it any worse. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to start exercising to start stimulating those muscle groups so that they don't fade away. So keep, like, even just things like jogging on the treadmill, or when I say jogging, it's like walking on the treadmill. But even just doing in the pool and swimming laps. And when I first got in the pool, I couldn't put my arm above my head. But
Wow.
it eventually it progressed, and it got better day by day, and it started to, like, exponentially got better. And I eventually rehabbed to a position where they were like, yep, okay, let's have a go. Let's see if we can get you back on snow. Let's see how that on snow component goes, and then we'll reassess whether you're ready for Sochi. So I got back on snow, had a couple of days. It wasn't great, but it was probably better than I thought it was going to be. So we sort of kept progressing, and we just kept taking each day as it came, and each day was better than the last. And yeah, I finally got the all clear to compete at Sochi, and it was like, I was far from my best form, to say the least, but I got there. And I think, like, in my mind, that was kind of, that's as good a job as I could. Given all the circumstances, I
It's a
feel like I
victory.
reached my goal.
Yeah. It's a victory in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so it's refreshing to even hear that too, with, and this is no, I'm not trying to have no offense to physicians or anybody responsible for somebody's care ultimately, but more often than not, it would typically be, oh, you can't, or it's not safe, or it's not possible. And so it's really nice to hear that, oh no, it's possible. I was like, it can't get any worse. And you were all on the same page when it came to getting to the Olympics. Because I oftentimes too, even with athletes that I've seen, they typically, it's like they're going to compete regardless, like regardless of what you have to say, what advice you have to give them, whether it be good, whether it be bad. And so, I mean, kudos to your whole team to put it on themselves to do everything they can to put you in a better position. And you yourself, especially, to say exactly that. Well, it literally cannot get any worse than it is right now, and can only improve from here on out. And I want to highlight, what was the time frame for this? Because I think that is just something that
Yeah,
to know.
from memory, it was about 6 weeks from when I broke my back to when I competed at the game. So yeah, you think about, like, just the emotional roller coaster of those 6 weeks. And I kind of took the approach of, I need to do this rehab anyway. So why not try and do it as quickly as I possibly can, with the goal being the Olympics, and let's see how it plays out. Like,
Yeah.
there's no, like, yeah, if you half-ass it, you're not going to get there. It's going to take, yeah, it was just sort of that approach of, like, why not? Like,
Yeah.
why not give it a go? And you're right, like, to have those physicians and physios in my corner encouraging me to push harder than I probably felt that I was comfortable pushing, and just understanding how the body works, and how that those bones and those muscle groups work, and understanding, yeah, just how that idea of, you can't make it worse. So it's about activating those muscles so they don't deteriorate, because that's going to be like, when we talk about rehab from injury, like, a broken bone will mend, but it's the muscles around it that take time to recover. And particularly when you, like, a common injury, snow sports injury is blowing your ACL, your anterior cruciate ligament in your knee.
Mm-hmm.
And the surgery is fine. You get your whatever it is, your hamstring, or inserted as a replacement ACL. but what takes the time is the recovery and rebuilding the muscles around your knee and your hamstring, if that's where they've taken the graft from, as opposed to the actual ligament that's been inserted. So yeah, just understanding that element, I think was a real mind shift for me about how to tackle the rehab. So yeah,
And having
and
that
it all worked out.
yeah, having that shift in mindset of what went right, and in the face of uncertainty, what's within my control to do today, and instead of having your usual targeted 12-month plan, every day was, let's get through what we can today, let's see how we can progress, and gradually seeing that improvement from the day to day within 6 weeks, mind you. So I think it.
Well, and those 6 weeks, they were like 12-hour days every. So I'd literally go. I'd get up. I'd go. I'd do some walking and swimming in the pool. Then I would go to the gym. Then I'd do physio. Then I'd do recovery in the pools, and it was like one thing after another. And yeah, it was the most intense sort of rehab block that I've obviously ever done. It was, but it's pretty incredible what your body can do when you put your mind to it.
Yeah, I can only imagine, like, 12-hour day of basically just straight exercise the entire time for the most part. But and I think that's really why I wanted to interview you today, because it's such an inspiring story for anybody out there, whether it be they struggling with personal issues or a loss of a family member, or they're coming back from a major injury that could be potentially career ending or could deter their plans for competing at the world stage or just progressing as an athlete. And I think more people need to hear those types of stories. So thank you again for sharing that. I'm sure it's not always easy to kind of rehash some of those events, but just truly inspiring. That's like the only word that comes to mind.
And look, for what it's worth, I think people, like, you have to write your own story, particularly when it comes to like, I mean, I've heard so many stories about whether it's athletes or otherwise that they have a career-ending injury, and you hear so many stories about where athletes make that recovery from a career-ending injury. So I guess my advice is everyone writes their own story, and yes, there is a majority that don't, but why not be the exception?
Yeah, or at least do what you can, what's within your control to try. Because
Yep.
I am a firm believer in, it's okay to fail. I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. Because that
Totally.
only feeds into other things, other aspects of your life, and other events or other sports you want to venture into, whatever the case may be. And so working with physios for that period of time, and that intensively and basically all day, is there anything that you learned with that interaction or that experience that you would like to highlight when it comes to physios or physical therapists? Any advice you'd like to share for those who are new to that field?
It's a good question. Look, we always had when you're on tour, you have like a really close relationship with your physio, because you spend between half an hour and an hour every day on the bench talking to them about everything from life just to your injuries and everything else. My advice is probably, particularly athletes know their bodies so well, and they know if things are niggling or out of place. So my advice to any physio or otherwise is just that. It's just listening. Is, yes, understand, like, whether you do your assessment and you understand how the body works, but it's particularly an athlete will be able to, they might not be able to articulate what's wrong, but if something's off, that's what you need to listen to.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I need to be better. I think it's much easier. I think for the most part, clinicians already have in their mind what they want to say uh,
Yes.
before even the thought has been processed in the brain appropriately. And so I try every day to at least pause for a second and really try and digest what they're telling me, and really try and empathize with the athlete, with the client, patient, whatever the case may be, because it's their experience, and we've all had our own experiences of pain and injury, and I think it's easier to forget when you're not dealing with it actively, and so just trying to be aware of that too. Yeah.
And that idea of like when a patient comes in and talks about their issue, not trying to fit a solution around their issue. I think it's more about building up the issue from first principles and kind of understanding what the problem is, what the cause is, and exploring every kind of option as to how you solve that.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to struggling athletes, or any athlete that may have personal issues or current injuries, whatever the case may be? What advice would you give to them?
Look, there's a couple of things that mottos, or I guess lines that I live by, and a couple of them is control the controllables. I took that approach. Obviously, we competed in a sport where you're in the elements and things change on a minute by minute basis, and you have to be able to adapt. And it's not worth stressing about those things that you can't control. What you can control is your process, and that's really, I mean, that's across everything, whether it's sport or business or otherwise. If you control the process and control what you're in control of, let the results, let the other elements just unfold the way they will. It's not worth stressing over trying to fit them into a box and trying to manage them, because you inevitably you can't. The other element is, I think there's a positive to be found in every situation if you're motivated and determined enough to find it. And I look at just the issue with, or just the that whole year with losing my dad, and then having to recover from that injury, and just trying to search for a positive, search for something good. And if you do have the determination, if you do have that motivation, there is a positive outcome to be found.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I am for it. I'm here for it. And so my last question for you, Scott, is very important, extremely important. What is your favorite muscle? I ask this to all of the interviewees.
Well, I should really answer with, and I don't know the name. Perhaps you could help me out. But what would be the muscle group that surrounds your transverse processes? Because that's the muscle group that really that saved my my Olympic appearance in Sochi.
Oh man, there's a bunch. Oh, you put me on the spot. But I mean, like, so the main ones are like.
I'm glad I've turned the tables, because you certainly put me on the spot. So there you go.
I mean, you have like the smaller muscles that are literally connecting the vertebrae, from vertebrae to vertebrae, and then you have the larger muscles that connect the entire vertebrae with each other. So you have like the group, the erector spinae or spinae. I'm not sure how people pronounce it, but that's the different types of pronunciations. And then you have things, so like the smaller muscles that go from vertebrae to vertebrae, like multifidi, the rotatories muscles, the longissimus muscles. Oh my gosh, there's a bunch.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. So let's go with one of those.
I like it. I love this. I'm very surprised by all the answers I continue to get it, and I'm really happy about that.
And I suspect they're all related to each individual's experiences, right? Like,
and their personalities. I got the one, so the muscle is responsible for the smile, muscle is
oh
responsible,
yeah,
like your hip muscles or your glutes, right? I got the shoulder muscles, so it's been fun. It's been fun.
epic. Yeah, that's a good
Um,
question. It's a good way to round out a podcast.
right. But thank you again so much, Scott. It's been really fun talking with you today. Um, and man, congrats again to your family, your growing family, and I hope everything is well over there in Australia.
Yeah, we're just coming into summer, so it's yeah, it's awesome. I'm looking forward to
Yeah, that's
some
right.
warmer weather. And yeah, but look, thanks again. I really appreciate the time and yeah, sharing my story. And yeah, thank you.
Yes. All right. And so I'm gonna